Right, let's make sure the microphone is on. Hello everyone, welcome from very cold morning in England, and I'm very excited about this video because I'm going to share with you some of my favorite books of this year, and I thought it would be great to do this at my favorite reading spot. Right behind me is a 15th century church, a bit further down is a 15th century cemetery, and here is my favorite bench where I love sit and to read. At the end of this video, if the church is not closed, we'll get inside and I'll show you the beautiful architecture. But since I have really a lot of great books to share with you and it's getting quite cold, I'll jump straight to my favorite reads. Transition. Somebody just passed next to me and saw the number of books I've got on the bench and asked me if it is enough reading for me in the park and whether I'm going to go home only after finishing all those 12 books that I've selected for you. The first book I would like to share with you is written by Carlo Rovelli, the Italian physicist who you might know from his best-selling books called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. This book is called There Are Places in the World Where Rules Are Less Important Than Kindness. It is a collection of his essays that he wrote for different Italian newspapers. They were available only in Italian before, but I think in August or July this year they were released in English. This is just a brilliant collection of essays. What essentially Rovelli does in almost every essay is he connects art with science, and he actually has a wonderful quote. He says that those who think that art and science are separate are essentially foolish. I've actually made a separate page for this book on my website and I'll link it down below. I've also made a separate review of this book on my channel. I'll link it somewhere here or wherever it is. It is a wonderful book, a wonderful edition, and it is actually a really great gift to anyone. And the next book that I would like to recommend is called 4,000 Weeks, Time and How to Use It, written by Oliver Burkeman. 4,000 weeks refers to our average lifespan. So if you live till the age of 80, then roughly you'll have around 4,000 weeks in your life. I'm 32 right now. That means that I'm close to my 1,600th week, around like that. And this fact puts everything into perspective. You start to think about time quite very differently. And I think the central subject of this book is the fact that we all seek meaning in our lives. We all try to understand why are we here. Very often the alternatives that are offered today are referred to work, career, productivity. But while some people find their meaning in their careers or in productivity, some people don't, and they just follow this productivity trap. And what Oliver Burkeman wants from us, essentially, if we boil down in a sentence, he says that we always pay attention to what is truly meaningful in our lives. I've actually made a separate video on this book as well. I'll link it somewhere in the corner of this video. I've also added my favorite quotes from this book to my website as well, so I'll link it up down in the description so you can check. The next book that I would really love to recommend to you is Walter Isaacson's The Codebreaker, Jennifer Doudna, Gene Editing and the Future of the Human Race. This book is dedicated to Jennifer Doudna, who received a Nobel Prize for her discovery of gene editing technologies. Essentially, this technology will allow us to edit our genes. As with any technology, we can use this for good or for evil, and the border between those two is very blurry. So for example, we can use gene editing technology to cure genetic diseases that hurt people a lot. But at the same time, this technology allows us to engineer humans, choose the eye color, the level of intelligence, and technically every other feature. So this is a big challenge to humanity, and I believe that it is kind of a bigger challenge than even the artificial intelligence. So this book is really wonderful. Walter Isaacson also wrote really great biographies of Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, and Steve Jobs. I really enjoyed reading them as well. I've created a separate page on my website with all the notes, all the key facts, quotes, everything that might interest you. I'll link it down below. below, and I have a review, a separate video review of this book, also will be linked up either in the description or in the corner somewhere here. I need a coffee to boost up. It's actually getting warmer. Right, the fourth book that I would like to recommend is Donald Robertson's How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. This book really helped me to cope with my anxiety, generally with my emotions. It is not a simple biography of Marcus Aurelius, the author of famous Meditations. Donald Robertson is a cognitive behavioral psychotherapist, so he approaches the biography of Marcus Aurelius through the psychological lens. He reveals that Marcus Aurelius was human like anyone else's, who had his own childhood traumas, his own inner conflicts. It is very often easy to forget facts like this and to deify someone like Marcus Aurelius because he was the emperor of Rome, a great author, but inside himself he was a human who was trying to cope with his emotions. I've interviewed Donald Robertson on my podcast. I'll link it down below, and it was one of my favorite interviews of this year. He gave a lot of practical tips from his own experience to Stoic practices of how we can apply all those Stoic principles to our own lives. I'm really worried that this review might go completely disastrous because of my microphone really being all around. The next book that I would like to recommend to you is also a book on philosophy. It's called Hiking with Nietzsche, Becoming Who You Are. It is one of the books that you pick up in a bookshop, you start reading, and you realize you have to buy it. I've read, I think, most of Nietzsche's works and many works about him, but John Carlo still managed to find a really great way to reintroduce Nietzsche into my own life. I think what makes this book unique is the fact that Carlo connects Nietzsche's ideas with his own life through a memoir. Carlo traveled to Carlo traveled to Switzerland and stayed in the same room where Nietzsche used to stay. And Carlo tells about his own inner struggles, how he was going through depression, how he was struggling with becoming a parent. And he connects all of these struggles with his own life. And I think that's why it was a huge privilege to have John Carlo on my podcast. The episode is called How Nietzsche Can Save Your Life. I'll link it down below as well. I really enjoyed that interview. It reveals so much about Nietzsche and how we can apply his ideas to our own life. Right, let's jump to the only fiction book on this list, which is written by Japanese author Natsume Soseki. It's called Kusamakura. I really enjoyed this book because it's written in such a poetic language, and this book doesn't have any plot. It is a story of a man who is climbing a mountain in Japan, and the whole beauty of this book is about how this man, who believes himself to be an artist, looks at this world. He describes every encounter, he describes his dreams, and it is written in such a beautiful language that I haven't encountered for a while. If you are familiar with Rainer Maria Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, which is Rilke's advice to an aspiring poet on how to look at the world, how to become a better artist, this book is very similar to that. If Rilke wrote, let's say, from the Western angle, this book talks about poetic outlook through kind of the lens of Japanese culture. I really enjoyed this book, and I've written an article which is called How to See the World Through Poetic Eyes, where I compare Rilke with Soseki together, and I show what is the difference between the Western outlook to poetry and the Eastern approach to art. Unfortunately, Natsume Soseki is no longer alive, so I cannot invite him to my podcast. That's the thing actually that makes me sad very often, is the fact that I love a lot of authors who are dead already, and I cannot invite them to the podcast or see how do they speak on camera. It adds so much to the personality, but maybe it also keeps the mystery about them. And to continue with the topic of poetic outlook on this world, I would like to tell you about this wonderful book called To See Clearly, Why Ruskin Matters, written by Suzanne Fagence Cooper. I think one of the reasons why I buy books only from bookshops is because once you enter them, you can discover a book that you have never heard about, but you were looking exactly for that one. And this is one of the books like that, because I was really looking for a book that would introduce me into the life of John Ruskin, who was one of the greatest art critics in history. The way Ruskin writes about art makes your heart tremble, it makes you passionate about art. And he can teach a lot about how we can appreciate art, how we can understand art. This book does exactly like that. It introduces you into the life of Ruskin, not by giving you a chronological biography or making it boring, but by telling you how Ruskin looked at the world, how he developed those skills of looking at the world through those unique poetic eyes. I've actually made a separate video about this book. I'll link it once again somewhere down in the description. It's been, I think, exactly 10 years since one of my favorite public speakers, writers, and generally, I think, humans, Christopher Hitchens, passed away. And I couldn't not recommend you to read this wonderful short essay, I can say, called Letters to a Young Contrarian. I think this is a very pertinent book to our time, when everybody has a very strong political opinion, which they believe is very logical, very constructive. And I believe that what made Christopher Hitchens unique was that he was contrarian by nature. He questioned not only opinions of his opponents, but also his own opinions. He wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. When the publisher asked whether he would like to do a tour where he can do all the book signing and meeting up with his followers and people like that, Christopher Hitchens refused that and asked instead to give him some money so he can travel and debate the religion, the existence of God, with the leading religious personalities of United States. If you would like to know how to question everything and how not to settle for the consensus, this is a wonderful read. The next book is so hard to review, and I really don't know how I'm going to approach this. It is a bit ironic because it's also one of my favorite books. And this book is written by Philip Hoare. It's called Albert and the Whale. The problem with reviewing this book is that it is part memoir, part art history, part biography of Albrecht Dürer, one of the greatest artists ever lived. All of these are combined to tell you about the influence art, Dürer, our subconscious, has on us. There is no way I can combine my thoughts around this book because it is so unique. It would have been really easy if he wrote this book by telling that Albert Dürer was born on this date, created those works on these dates, and then died in this year. It would have been really easy. I would have said, like, this is a great book and biography of Albert Dürer, one of the greatest artists of all time. But since this book is so diverse, it dives into psychological portrait of Dürer and connects it through network of different references to the lives of Thomas Mann, David Bowie, Carl Jung, Albert Einstein, and each of these connections is uniquely described by Philip Hoare. It is very difficult to review a book like this, so forgive me for such a vague review, but if any of those words resonated to you, I would really recommend you to read this book. Once again, it's called Albert and the Whale. Next book that I would really love to recommend to you is Roberto Colasso's The Unnameable Present. I believe that Colasso would be a great person who could debate with Christopher Hitchens. Not because he's religious, but he has a lot of valid questions to the idea of secularism. This Unnameable Present essentially talks about that a transition that civilization is going through over the past 150 years, when we shifted, first of all, during the Renaissance, from God to human values. And recently, as Nietzsche noticed as well, is that we shifted from humanist ideas to the ideas of money, of productivity, of utilitarianism. And this is what Roberto Galasso talks about in his book. It is not easy read, I would say, because it is very dense with ideas. So it requires you to pause, to write down, to analyze it, to fully absorb what Galasso means. I think there is a reason why Nobel Prize winning poet Joseph Brodsky said that a reader can stumble upon a writer such as Roberto Galasso just once in their lifetime. It is one of the best reviews I've heard in my life. But yeah, I believe that this book is eye-opening. The book before the last is called The Bookseller of Florence, written by Ross King. A wonderful, easy read for everyone who is a bibliophile. If you spend a lot of time in the bookshops with reading, this is a book for you. It is a wonderful gift for book lovers. Ross King writes really brilliantly, so engaging. And it is a book about manuscript hunters, about people who traveled across Europe during the 15th century to find lost works of ancient times, and they brought it back to Florence. And this book is focused on the life of Vespasiano da Bisticci, who was considered to be Michelangelo of bookselling. Wonderful story of manuscript hunters. I've interviewed Ross King, and if you would like to dive into this book deeper, I'll leave a link to that podcast down below so you can check it out. Okay, and the last book that I would like to tell you about is written by Sonke Arendt, and it's called How to Take Smart Notes. I decided to include this book at the end of this video because this book revolutionized the way I engage with books. It talks about a very unique note-taking system which allowed one German academic to write several dozen books in a very short amount of time, and he was actually a very respected academic. If you struggle with remembering what you have read, if you are a writer who wants to collect different ideas and put them together for your novel or non-fiction book, if you are a student at the university who struggles with writing essays, this is a book for you. Right, as I said, I had to narrow down this list and include just 12 books here. But if you would like to find out more about what I'm reading and more book recommendations, consider subscribing to my newsletter. Every month I send brief summaries of my favorite reads. You can also go and check out my podcast. Everything will be linked down below. I would really appreciate if you'll leave a comment down below. But as I promised in the beginning of this video, I would really love to share with you inside of the church that is behind me. So let's go and check it out. Right, guys, and as I promised, we'll get into the cathedral and see what is it like inside. Let's hope that it is open and we can see. Look at this lamp. Right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it. It was quite cold and I cannot feel my feet. And thank you a lot, and I'll see you in 2022. I hope you'll have a good rest of the year and wish you all the best.